sites, on the Derbyshire and the Notts Talking Space web page sites, because we have had some interest from people who can't make today who want to see what the discussion, where it goes. And then if you want to use your the chat function or the hand raising function to ask a question, make a comment, put something in the chat, then please do so. So if you're not speaking, could you put your microphones on mute? And it's great. I was going to say, please keep your cameras on, because it's good to see people and get some feedback, even if it's jeering or thumbs down on what we're talking about. So those that don't know me, I think I've met most people over the last few months. I'm Stuart Batchelor, so I tend to focus around Active Derbyshire in terms of the two counties, and I take the lead around the built and open space infrastructure. So hence my interest around the leisure centre side. And then if you can introduce yourself, just a little bit background, and then maybe just go into your introduction to today.
No, well, thank you, Stuart, and hello, everybody. Really good to see so many people attending. Well, I'm John, and I've been in the leisure industry for all my life, and all of it has been in leisure facility management. Although I've tried to take an interest in other parts of the landscape, which I think is really important, most particularly just now. I suppose, where are we just now? Well, obviously, from a leisure facility point of view, everybody's delighted that the facilities are reopened, still with restrictions in place, and time will tell as to how those restrictions start to lift. I think from the conversations that I've had, the way things have responded, swimming has bounced back very, very positively. So there's particular support for people, communities wanting to return to swimming. Swimming lessons have also been exceedingly popular, and I know there's been some national press about that. And I suppose, number one, it's very, very reassuring, because it's clearly it's an essential life skill. Number two, it's probably not surprising, because during the period of closure, we've probably lost a whole year's cohort of 4-year-olds who couldn't join, who would normally join a Learn to Swim program during the course of the last 12 months. So there's going to be huge demand for swimming lessons, and my understanding is that most, and that's going to put pressure on programs, but I think most partnerships are working well together in order to create the necessary space for programs to expand. Key revenue generator for most of the operators is the return of fitness. Most operators are reporting back to me that their membership levels have been at around, or that they've lost between 40 and 50% of fitness members over the course of the last 12 months. So they're starting from a very low base. Recovery has gone, there has been a spike, as we well expected. And obviously that's encouraging that's the case. We're still very uncertain. Everybody I speak to, whilst they're having to provide forecasts for local authority partners, they're nervous about what recovery is actually going to look like. Will numbers recover back to where they were? Will they go beyond? Because actually people have found that actually health is really important to them, and this is a facility is somewhere where I can take care of my own health. Or will it only recover below? And I think the smart people are not gambling just now. Things are good at the moment. They're pleased with how things are going. They've made some changes to their business models. A lot of operators have unfortunately made job cuts, but they are all talking to me about the need to adjust their product in order that it's got wider appeal. How quickly they're going to be able to do that in order that they can broaden the market, broaden the appeal of physical activity within a leisure centre, I don't know. There's limited, resource. There's limited bandwidth to really apply to those things, and certainly those who are working in unitary authorities are having perhaps the most positive conversations with health, and are looking to sort of pivot and build a proposition and do a greater amount of work on the intervention side of things in addressing health inequality and other population health issues. So I think that's broadly where we were. If that suits as a bit of an intro, Stuart.
Great, yeah, thanks, John. I just comment about the swimming. Really, I booked my my place in the Lane yesterday morning. That's an Everyone Active facility, and I'm sure we've got some Everyone Active people on the call. And there was about twice as many. I think there were about 16 in the Lane as opposed to the maximum of 10. So I just wondered whether there was there's been a change in some of the policies that the facilities are increasing the occupancy of lanes, particularly in swimming, going forward, and that's been a change over the last week or so. Maybe you can Rebecca, just put that in the chat as to whether you think there's that was something local to Hood Park Leisure Centre. Great. I think thanks, John, for just setting the scene. Certainly, I've had a couple of conversations since the last one with people around. I think Martin Allison presented that idea about the current or the historical model has been really keeping affluent people active, and whether that business model could survive, and whether it should move towards one focus more on health and well-being, and public facilities very much targeting people who are inactive as being the most needy. And I think the conversations I had was it's actually really difficult to move that far along, because where's the money coming from to make that happen? But some discussion, some thinking is happening around almost a middle point, as you picked up, John, around how you become better equipped as a contractor to deal with or to engage with people who are inactive, and try and bring that forward. So if anyone, I'm tempted to pick on a few people I've had discussions with, but it would be great for anyone to come forward with that, with their views on that, and whether there's anything, John, that you've got specifically around that to contribute.
I think at this moment in time, just to do a little bit more scene setting. I think we had the launch of the Sport England strategy in January, which I think was a very different type of strategy. Certainly, all the operators I'm speaking to, that's they've taken that strategy seriously. It's resonated with them, and they're looking at how things are going to pan out. We haven't heard anything else from Sport England since as to how it's intended to implement. There's talk of action plans being created. The other thing, of course, that we've had is that we've had local elections. So I think the political landscape is still uncertain. Whilst elections happened last Thursday, it's going to take a wee bit of time until we really know how local authorities and how politicians are seeing things in the future, and how many are asking the fundamental question around facilities. What is the purpose of my facilities? Are they an amenity for those who can afford to use them, or are they a contributor to population health in a wider context? And it will be interesting to see how many, whether those types of questions are begin to be asked, because of course we do know that leisure facilities are predominantly attended by the most affluent in society, overrepresented by a factor of 4 by people from the most affluent wards, and underrepresented by a similar factor of 4 in the most deprived wards. So, I think there's a debate to be had as to say whether they're an amenity that has a price for delivery, or whether they are a contributor to population health, where we value the role that they play in the communities in which we live and work.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay, I'm going to preempt a few people contributing then. Just thinking of certainly in Derbyshire, where I'm aware of, we have some. I think in High Peak and Staffordshire Moorlands, Rob Wilkes is looking at a kind of strategic options appraisal around the future. So, Rob, maybe you could give us a little bit of an insight into that and your thinking about that in a moment. We've got some new facilities currently being built in Derby City. And I know a few talking spaces ago, Owen did a bit of an introduction into the insight-led approach that's happening around Moorways Sports Village and a football facility. But I know Moorways is being prepared for outsourcing, I believe. So maybe there's we could have a Derby kind of view on what's happening there. And then I know in South Derbyshire there's a long-standing leisure management contract is going to go out for renewal in the next couple of years. And from I think Hannah, you're leading on that. It's what kind of support do you need for that process? What's the information? What extra do you need to be able to do a good job of that and take that forward? So, Rob, would you be able to just give us your views on High Peak?
Yeah, I can chip in. Sorry, my camera's not working, so I can't turn it on. But yeah, as Stuart said, we're going through a process to hopefully transform our leisure provision, both in terms of the built facilities and the way that they're managed. So that's been an ongoing piece of work for the last year or so, and it's going to continue. We've got an operating contract that ends in April 2024. We're looking at significant capital investment into the facilities. So at the moment, kind of like a twin track, really looking at what facility mix is going to be needed in the future, at the same time as considering how the facilities are going to be managed, actually how they can better broaden their lens, meet a greater level of appeal. What partners might we need to develop stronger relationships with, and how do we go on that journey with them? How does learning and development of people's skills kind of feed through all of that, so that we're developing a different workforce that can engage more broadly with the type of demographic groups that we might be prioritising, whilst also trying to retain what's great about leisure centres at the moment, because let's face it, they've got a place in the market. They engage with a percentage of the population base well. They do meet the need in some cases, in quite a lot of cases. So it's about how to retain what is good and what's working, as well as trying to broaden the lens and create that wider appeal. But I think it's about, for us, it's about trying to develop that vision with people rather than in a silo on our own, thinking that the council or the leisure operator in the council know what's best. And especially some of the markets or the partnerships, the sectors that we want to try and work more closely with, being honest, we don't know enough about it. We don't speak their language. They don't understand our language. So it's taking it right back to try to begin a journey that's going to ultimately, in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, take us to a better place to build from. So, some immediate things are happening now, but it's also a very long-term view. So yeah, that's a sort of a summary where we're at. And I think as well, the important thing in all of this for me is to take it in context of the wider view. So leisure facilities form a part of the jigsaw, engaging in people in active lives. There's lots of different aspects that sit outside the leisure centres that are equally as valuable, that need to play into that and be considered at the same time. So it's having a wider possible view, both on how the leisure centres need to transform, but then also how they fit into that bigger picture, and not just in terms of leisure, but in terms of regeneration, planning, the other sort of significant players when it comes to local authority and community priorities as well.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Can I just outline how much awareness is there around your politicians about this kind of agenda and the the thinking that's going around the role of the leisure centre currently or in the future?
It's come quite a long way, really. I think it's fair to say that probably in some cases it was quite traditional, the approach. I think we have a leisure commissioning board now which pulls together chief exec directors, portfolio holders for both councils, our operator and ourselves as well. So that's helped to give a greater level of understanding as to what the broader picture looks like and what the direction of travel needs to be. I think there's still a long way to go, but I think we've positioned leisure where it's right at the centre of the conversation. And to be honest, if you look at COVID and the impact, it's probably helped with that because it's costing loads of money. So actually, some of the big decision makers and chief execs are really, really interested in being part of the conversation and hopefully being part of the solution.
Okay, and just I'll ask the same question. Well, it's one I was teeing up for Hannah later on, but what kind of support is perhaps needed from nationally or locally to help you along this process?
I think for me, I always really value conversations that we can have between each other. I think the greater amount of people that can come together where there's a shared issue like this to discuss ideas, plans, I think is important. And I probably don't think there is that. This is a great opportunity. It's the first time really this has been the sole focus of the conversation. Obviously we had the session a couple of months back, but I do think there's a bit of a gap there. And then I think there's an aspect for me around learning and training and development. I don't know who can step into that space, whether SimSpa have got a role to play or it needs other things feeding into it. And I think obviously the big question mark is around health and the changes that are going on, and how we really understand that landscape and position ourselves is important. And whether that's nationally, whether it's locally, I think there's got to be a focus there. And we're just trying to plot our way through. It's really complicated and complex. It's not easy and it takes a long time. So I think that's got to evolve, because obviously the health system's evolving at the same time, isn't it? Which makes it doubly difficult.
Yeah. Can I come in there, Stuart? Do you mind?
Yeah.
No, it's really interesting that the points you make there, Rob. The guys up in Greater Manchester have identified a similar issue. They recognise that in order to develop, perhaps for their leisure service to survive, they're pivoting towards a more health driven proposition, working in a broader landscape. And in doing so, they've recognised that there's a weakness around leadership, and that there's a weakness around skills training, and so that's been identified across the sector, and we're trying to put a programme together that really enhances those who are working in leisure centres to develop a leadership programme for them, where they can understand what the difference is between management and leadership, because they're going to need to behave more as leaders within community and working in a collaborative way rather than managers of a building. That they understand the landscape to a far greater extent, so how they can what other partners exist, and how they're they may need to interact and work with them, and how they develop new skills of working in the future around collaboration and influence rather than, you know, a sort of more directive style. So that's being developed at the moment. Simsford have been involved in those discussions, and so have Future Fit. So I think it's an interesting observation you make, and I think you're certainly not alone in identifying that there's probably a gap there that needs filling just now as we move from COVID into a new era.
Okay, thanks, John. I'm just thinking, rather than doing it right at the end, if people could put in the chat just the kind of things they might want support with, what they see, you know, is this kind of discussion, this network useful? Would you want to see something like this continue? Because I think certainly it's just in the middle of my screen, I've got Jade Gresham from a colleague from Active Derbyshire. We frequently have conversations around where our strategy is going and focus on inactive people. And Jade is very passionate about making sure we think about, still consider active people, keeping them active, supporting them, and the sector. And even though we're thinking a lot more about grey and blue space in terms of people being active outside, what we call the grey space, which is the facilities, are absolutely crucial within a community. So whether that's a leisure centre, a village hall, a post office, whatever, they can all play a really important role from a workforce point of view in terms of influencing people to be active, as well as a venue for people to actually be active. So we want to make sure that we provide support where it's needed within our new strategy for that sector as well, because we feel we're taking a direction of travel that I think the last couple of years has taken us slightly away from the sector, and we just need to make sure that we don't get carried away by that momentum, and we kind of set ourselves in the right place. So please add things into the chat. That would be really useful. Okay, I just want to move on to Derby City. So I don't know if it's something Owen or Wayne or even Duncan want to pick up, but just a little bit of a synopsis really on what's happening regarding engaging the community in the new facilities and the thinking moving ahead as to when particularly Moorways swimming facility opens, what that might look like now rather than what you think it might have looked like before the pandemic.
I'm happy to kick off, I think, just in terms of some of the work that has taken place today, not necessarily about the design, build, construction, strategic need really for something like Moorways and the pool down there, but because I do need to leave in about 4 minutes. But I suppose what we made a decision a few years ago now to think about, as an organisation using our resource to work in a bit of a different way, to think about how are we working on a more, having more of a place focus and thinking about supporting our people and our place, and specifically the ones where we know we've got high levels of inactivity, and the environment and the place in which they live and how we could support them to be active. So we started that process a couple of years ago now, to look at some areas in the city, some places in the city. And one of the reasons why we chose those places was because they were earmarked for capital investment. You know, we knew Moorways was something was going to happen at Moorways. I think what was in, what was out has probably changed, as has the number of chief execs we've had over the last few years, along with politicians, etc. But we knew something was going to be happening there because the facility being boarded up or decommissioned essentially, and something was going to be put in its place. Similarly, we also looked at the north of the city and thinking about the work we're doing, the Football Foundation around Park Life, or the Football Hubs programme as it is now. So they were some of the reasons why we chose to look at focusing on place. And what we did was try and develop an approach or a model to really understand place-based working for ourselves as a team, as a services and local authority for physical activity, and thinking about how do we then start to have more of an insight-led approach to help support and think about the role that these facilities can play in reaching the people that traditionally they don't reach, and we've probably not really reached them. And so what that allowed us to do was really take a different approach to understanding, I suppose, the local nuances, the physical activity system at play, and at a local level. And it's interesting with people saying it sits within the context of a broader health facility, sit within that broader context. They do, and actually it's about recognising all of the wider asset base that operates within a community, and then thinking about actually how do we then start to use that to inform some of the, that could be around the programming or some of the relationship between those facilities and the community. And I think that's a really, really important thing to do, because we know that, or at least I know that from a football perspective, and thinking about this work we're doing, the Football Foundation, the football stuff's the easy bit. You know, you ain't, from an operator perspective, you ain't going to need to work hard for that. It's probably a bit like swimming lessons, as John said at the start. You know, there's a year's worth of backlog of lessons. You're not going to have to work for that. It's just going to happen. So actually, if that's going to happen, yes, we need to be mindful that it's a good quality service and operation, but actually how far then are we reaching to think about the role that these facilities can play within that immediate community? And when I say the immediate community, I mean those people that live on its doorstep. Because for me, it's a crying shame if those people that don't live on that doorstep aren't accessing them, or they don't feel it's something for them. So I suppose the approach we've taken is to try to understand that a little bit better, really, to really have that more of an insight-led approach, thinking about how are we working with the community that is around those facilities, and what role can they play in shaping that, but also what role do they want to play with that moving forward, and so all of that insight-led approach, if you like, is trying to think about, yes, those facilities play a really important role, and they could play an even bigger role, because essentially we're investing in these areas, not just in the facilities, but this is about how do we use it as an opportunity to regenerate the area, because the areas where we're building them are some of our more deprived areas, and look at something like Moorways, especially, you know, 40 odd million pounds worth of investment going into a place. It can't just be seen as a swimming pool. That's a real goal and opportunity to really think about regenerating the area and adding some real value to the people and that live in that place directly on the doorstep of it. So that's the approach we've taken, and we're still doing that. And I suppose fortunately we're in the phase of either construction or pre-planning stages with some of those things, so we can bring a lot of the people we've engaged with on that journey with us to hopefully when it does open, or they do open, they feel there's a role for them within that. But in terms of the wider stuff, I'll leave Wayne and Duncan to comment on that, because I do need to go now. But I'll watch the recording later. But really interesting stuff. Right.
Thanks, Owen. Wayne and Duncan, you've been dropped in it nicely there by Owen. And by me before that. So you want to make a contribution on that?
I'm not sure if Wayne's around. I think I saw a note from him that he'd gone to taking a call or something, so I'll carry on where Owen left off. If I bring you add a little bit more to what Owen said in terms of where we are, if that would help.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I'm not directly involved. I'm not the head of service for leisure centres, but I'm involved as on the physical activity and sport side. So tomorrow, in fact, is the bidders' day, which I'm taking part in. So we've got a number of bidders who have expressed interest in attending. I think the relevant point is, and my involvement is that included in the draft specification is an active communities section, active communities and Move More Derby. So we're looking for bidders to add value to our Move More Derby strategy, and we're asking bidders to set aside a ring-fence sum of money, £50,000 in fact, for how they are going to engage active communities. So in particular, those people in some priority neighbourhoods, those on the doorstep and beyond. As John mentioned earlier on, we know that the leisure centre usage is dominated by the affluent group. So this is a direct plan to how we can engage inactive and less active people. So, as I say, we've identified through Owen's insight work, Owen and his team's insight work, and yourself, Stuart, Active Derbyshire. So we've got the priority wards, and we'll be asking bidders in their submissions in due course to identify how they can work with us in a collaborative way to engage in active communities. And then further to that, and what we're still developing, we'll be developing some KPIs and things like that, so that we can actually measure it. So I think that's where we're at. I'm not sure if Wayne's back, who's more directly involved in the operational side, but if there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer.
Sorry, I'm manager as well as everything else today. So.
It's okay, Wayne.
I'm not really sure what thing picked up. I just caught Duncan picking up the end of what was going on at Moorways. I think he's just gone through that we are looking for an outsourced operator for the Moorways site. On the back of that, that means that Springwood, Derby Arena are staying in-house and will continue to be operated by ourselves at this time. So I think as we go forward, it's going to be a little bit about revisioning what those centres are. How do we, as an internal in-house operator, work with an outsourced operator to ensure that there's sort of in certain complementary services, things around health and fitness, how we look at the work that Owen and his team have been doing, how we work with the Live Well team, and how those sort of services operate through the different operators now that will be within the city. So I think going forward, there's going to be a piece of work for us to do in terms of looking at how collectively we work and get the best out of the leisure facilities that we've got for the city residents, and particularly those that are in the, I'll say, the non-affluent areas. I mean, Moorways will pick up a good proportion of those given its location, but it's really critical how we get those with the operator to actually walk through the door, because that's going to be a big challenge, big new shiny building, of how well the operator actually engages with the local community, and particularly those in the harder reach communities that are around Moorways. And I think that's where the work that Owen's been doing and yourself, Stuart, will be really supportive of what the operator wants to do. And then conversely is how do we then look at how we use Springwood, Derby Arena, I'll say Gate and Pool, which is again operated by another provider, to sort of pick up in some of those other areas.
Right. No, thank you, Wayne. And Duncan, I promise next time I'll put you on the spot, it'll be about parks.
Thank you, Duncan. Sorry.
So no,
thanks.
A couple of things that come out from that. I mean, Insight was mentioned there, and I know those people who might have signed up, the next 3 Wednesday lunchtimes, we've got sessions about the insight we've gathered around children and young people, active environments, and then the community in the system. So that's the next 3 Wednesdays, and that's the insight that will then help with our strategy going forward. Tomorrow's session on children and young people, for example, we know through the pandemic that children's activity levels in terms of 60 minutes a day activity has actually dropped down to 14%, so only 14% of children are active. And within that, those children who come from ethnic background, special educational needs, and from poorer families, their activity levels are even lower. In Derby, what that means is, where it's a predominantly Pakistani background community, those activity levels are extremely low. But in terms of a population, that ethnic group are really increasing population size much quicker than other groups. So, for example, 25% of free nursery places in Derby are taken up by youngsters from Pakistani background. So from a Derby City point of view, that's a real growth area. That community needs to be engaged in leisure facilities in terms from a health and wellbeing point of view, as well as a kind of community cohesion point of view as well. And I think the way that the facility side, the parks, in terms of connectivity around the city through cycling and walking, it's all coming together and really, is showing some good opportunities there. Okay, any questions around like a High Peak and Derby before we move on? Or John, did you want to come in then? I thought I saw your signal. Maybe not.
I was scratching my head, but it crossed my mind that Wayne raised a really interesting point around, because there are going to be different operators, and I think this also suggests this importance of understanding collaboration in the future, and making sure that that's a sort of key feature of how we, irrespective of operator, there has to be a collaborative approach across the landscape. And I think the more different stakeholders in the landscape appreciate each other's role, I think the more effective we'll be overall.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. Hannah, can I just ask you about, you're in a position where you're going to be leading, I believe, around that procurement of a new contract for 2 centres. What scares you the most about that, and what help do you need? And I know you've been involved from the health and physical activity point of view, which I think is a great place to come from, because you kind of get a lot of things we're talking about. But how is that going to? What do you need to help with that challenge?
Yeah, it's getting it right, isn't it? I think we've got a massive opportunity though, because we're going to be in the process working alongside the work Active Derbyshire doing, following up on this, renewing our strategy and using that as a base for how we commission our facilities moving forward. So it's that widest possible context and the wider role, and not just outside as well. So where we're at so far, we've spoken with colleagues at Sport England to gain advice. We're speaking to other local authorities who have recently gone through the process, and some great examples out there. Rob, spoken to him. We've spoken to Sutton Ashfield, who've just gone through the process. So they've had a really positive experience. They've got some really great insights. So we're sort of doing that background research at the moment. But what I need in order to lead the process, I think Rob and other colleagues are absolutely right. You need that buy-in from senior leadership, and a project sponsor at the top of the organisation who gets it and sees how it's going to fit into that widest possible picture, and getting those outcomes right in the strategic planning outcomes guidance, that we make sure we're going it from the widest possible concept, and it's not just about the financial return, it's about those wider outcomes and how we sell that to the powers that be and members, that it is about the wider outcomes. I don't think there'll be an issue with members in that respect, but it's not just seeing it as a way to potentially generate income for the authority. It's seen as a way to really be able to make a change to the lives of the people who live in the area, and get the people who are currently physically inactive to have means and the confidence to be active. I think one of our risks is we've got one building which is aging stock, and I've been on a couple of national webinars, and that's one thing that's sort of been said in one of the webinars I was in, that providers are being more cautious around facilities which have got aging stock, depending on the risk element that they might be picking up in terms of the maintenance agreements within the contract. So that's something we need to sort of bottom out. And who has responsibility for what. So that's a key thing as well. I think the points Rob and Wayne and colleagues have picked up around workforce are key. So I think it's how we engender that it's one big team who are trying to achieve the whole thing, whether that be a leisure provider, a local authority, a voluntary sector organisation, that we're all there to work for our residents, to give them the most positive opportunities. And some traditional, and this is, I'm speaking from personal experience, but traditional outlook from facilities and personnel can be, well, you're in direct competition with us, so why would we work with you? That's not the approach we want, and I'm going back years when I make that statement, but it's that we're all one big team driving towards the same outcome, and it shouldn't matter if they're going in through a leisure centre door or they're accessing another opportunity on the ground. It's making sure people are comfortable to be able to engage. And it's interesting about the workforce thing. I'm on one of the CIMSPA professional development committees, and that's based around it's quite facility based, the one I'm on at the moment, and that's a key thing to bring to the table, I think, about that wider collaborative approach. I'll take that back to the June meeting as well, because it's really, really important. You've got to have the right people who can engage in the right way, particularly with our more vulnerable or least active residents, and I think in some respects, you know, leisure centres have been used to having people who are motivated to walk through the door, so it's been an easy sell almost because they're already motivated to walk through. It's how we capture and support and give a confidence to people who want to make that transition in through the doors, and that might be in the form of, you know, more outside the centre doors delivery, so you give that positive experience to the you know, the confidence is built that they then want to engage in the wider facility-based opportunity as well. There's lots of things to weigh up, but a great, exciting opportunity as well. But it's bringing it all together that's going to be realistic and meaningful for people to want to bid for a contract, but at the same time achieve the overall outcomes of the district and bringing in all those wider partners such as health and what have you. Okay,
that's great, Hannah. I just wonder if we could have just a perspective from a contractor, just, you know, about what they're facing at the minute and their future thinking would be helpful. I'm sorry, Rebecca, you're on my screen, so you're the one I see, but just while you gather your thoughts on that, just to pick up, and I think in South Derbyshire, one thing we're talking about insight, and I think the active lives data and the packs that we produce to Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, they're okay, but they're not enough. And you really need to know your local community, because at the end of the day, they're 500 people who are giving their views. And I think that's the approach that has put Derby City in a good position, because there's been some place-based work there, and there's a real understanding of the communities, and that helps. I'd also just mention what's helped with Derby is the Sport England swim pilots. And in particular, the work that was done in Coventry around a new facility there, and the approach they took around things like disco, shows how old I am, but that kind of rave type approach to swimming sessions, which was proved to be really successful for young people or teenagers who perhaps don't normally think about swimming. And it made the staff feel more part of the facility. So instead of just being a cleaner or a receptionist, they actually became an advocate for physical activity and realised that they had a much bigger role, and that was getting the head of leisure from Coventry and to talk about that, I think was very helpful for the Derby team, and I would recommend that. So Rebecca, I don't know if that's given you time just to put your thoughts together.
Hi, yeah. So my role is an active communities manager, and I work for Everyone Active. So as you've just mentioned, Hannah, knowing that Ashfield have just been through the process to renew the contract, and Everyone Active were successful. So I think from my perspective, I've been working in the district for quite some time now. I've worked in Ashfield for 10 years. So I sort of had an understanding of the communities anyway, but going through that tender process has been really good, because it means that, sorry if you can hear the dog barking, it's made everybody I guess come together and understand the community a bit better and think about it. And like you said, from a higher level, we've worked in the community in Ashfield, but Everyone Active is a national company, and I think it's helped to get everybody to understand that. And from a point of view of a new contract, it's also been quite good to show our partnerships and create new partnerships with health providers as well. So in that respect, it's only a positive thing. So there's lots of exciting things to come. I guess from a facilities point of view, for me in active communities, I'm finding it. I want to get going. I want to get back into the communities, but with the restrictions and everything, just doing what we can at the minute. So I'm hoping that things ease up and then we can just start running with it. Any other questions? I mean, that was really brief. I need to let
No. Thank you for just drop you in on it there. So sorry about that, but thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if people have got any questions or observations, that would be great if you can put your hand up. There is just a comment in from Kirk Monk. I was nearly going to pick on Kirk as an operator with a PFI business model in place, and he must have read my mind, because he's putting something in the chat there about starting to have conversations with the operator but it's where the risk sits, and not much appetite coming from Sport England or Majesty's Treasury, I think that might be, to look at the specific issue showing how we change the outcomes, but still generate the income. And I think that is, I guess, when you're tied into something that's up to 2040, you know, the pandemic wasn't thought of, was it? And changes in business models. So some challenges there. Rob, you've put your hand up, I think.
Yeah, just a couple of things that are also playing out for us locally. The first thing is around purpose. So a lot of certainly the politicians and the chief exec and directors are asking about actually how do we make the leisure facilities more representative of our communities, and is an external operator the right organisational delivery vehicle to achieve that? Is it agile enough? Is it grounded locally enough? Obviously the staff generally are, but is the operation and the way that the organisation behaves, does that mirror? And the second bit is around finance. How does this all stack up in a position where we're obviously suffering as a result of COVID, and is it looked at as a cost line, or is it looked at as an investment line? Trying to understand what that sliding scale is between being more in tune with your community, delivering wider outcomes, and then how much are you prepared to invest in order to achieve those outcomes? I think they're the two big things that we're debating, and we'll continue to debate along the journey.
Great. It reminds me, Rob, of a conversation I had with a senior politician a couple of years ago from an authority who were just outsourcing their facilities, who just referred to it as a cost and not, you know, in terms of what the value of the facilities were to the community. So, you know, and I think part of our role is to try and change that outlook with those strategic leaders. Kirk, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, the point I've been trying to make is that we were what was called a Pathfinder project. we were going to solve all the issues in capital investment. The 100 million or 100 billion, I think it was, that Sport England estimated the stock needed. So I've been trying to sort of create a conversation whereby we can be a Pathfinder again, provided there's a willingness to look at the finances and the PFI credits and the expectations on the operator to carry all the risk in terms of third-party income. And, you know, we've got the buildings now. They've been fantastic. We've had fantastic responses in terms of participation. We think we've broken into some of these markets and these inequalities. But what I'm getting now is to survive, the operators going straight back to the commercial approach and to that 12% of people who can afford to go in. So it's a difficult one, but I'm getting no traction in terms of the sort of 30 or 40 PFI contracts that are operating around the country, who are all in the same position. We're stuck till 2040.
I think, if I remember correctly, and I'm not old enough to remember directly, but in World War II, Pathfinder squadrons were the ones that got shot down first. They went into bomb places.
It feels like that.
Yeah. So there we go. Okay. Thank you, Kirk, for that. Any other, Hannah?
Yeah, it was just a question for John, really, in terms of the conversations you're having with providers, John. Are you finding you know, their approach where they might have been ambitious and really keen to put capital investment forward to maximise outcome? Do you feel that approach has changed at all because of the last year and the financial challenges and pressures they're potentially on, or do you think they're still in a position where they're going to potentially be, you know, offering capital to match and maximise the opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I mean, capital could well be scarce because most have used reserves up, although for the bigger projects, most of the capital investment was coming through prudential borrowing and therefore repaid as a consequence of the revenue generation. Of course, there's there's a tail to that, because revenue generation is a little bit more difficult to predict now. But I do expect that will still be a route that's considered. But I think capital expenditure for buildings is something that's got to be debated as a sector. We need to understand what it means for us, because there could be a scarcity of capital for a few years, and that will sort of focus our choices, I think, a little bit. I mean, it was really interesting to hear sort of Kirk's perspective on going back on the PFI, because I think it sort of illustrates the need, if we're looking at contracts in the future, the importance of building the ability for that contract to be both resilient and responsive. I suppose being responsive means it can be resilient. And I think we have to accept that, you know, times do, whilst we might not have been able to predict a pandemic, we know that things change in society, and we have to have the ability to be able to respond to them and adjust our direction, and contracts have to be commercially flexible enough to be able to handle that. So you might be having a tough time at the moment, Kirk, but I'd urge you to persevere, because I think you raise a really important point. I think the other thing that I would come back to on looking at new contracts is, I think we should remember, and it'd be interesting to hear sort of Rebecca's view as well. There's lots of legacy stuff, you know, stacked up in contracts. You know, we have a legacy approach to programming, and we have often a legacy approach to pricing and opening hours and things like that, and concessionary schemes and what have you. And I do think there's a need for us to sort of rewrite the rule book, because I think often concessionary schemes, the benefits are going to the wrong people, and that's one of the things that we can start to deal with. I think we can have a much more intuitive and customer-centric approach to opening hours and things like that, and a greater degree of flexibility. I think there's lots of legacy stuff in old contracts that really we should get rid of and have a different way of approaching it.
I think that's a great point. Certainly, when I was involved in leisure contracts before, you took one from somebody else, or you amended the one you previously had and thought, well, we'll leave those timetabling the same. And I guess you know historically people could be operating the same timetables for tens of dozens of years, kind of thing. So that's a really good point, and it's about understanding that local population, isn't it? And even to the point of whether some communities still like leaflets through the door, and some want it digital, but you only find out by talking to those communities. Rebecca.
I was just going to reply to John about the programme, and I think it's a good example to use Ashfield because of the contract, but it has opened up so much more opportunity to be able to change the pricing, especially as we're trying to recover from COVID. We've changed our pricing structure at a certain point, and then as part of the contract we put in different concessionary memberships, which we've never had before, which I think really represented the population that we were trying to engage more with. So things like that weren't an option for us before are now in the contract, so it's great that we've got that option to do it.
Good.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, we've just got 3 minutes left, so if there are any final questions or points, that would be great. Otherwise, perhaps, I'm just picking up on a few things that have come through to me, really important points from the conversation. The insight, understanding the communities, strategic buy-in from, I think that's both professional officers, chief execs, treasurers, etc., in terms of understanding that it's, the role of leisure facilities, and they're not just being a cost. That movement towards more of a health agenda and trying to support health inequality or reduction of that. and that facilities should be representative of the local people. So yes, you may well be having swimming lessons that people are commuting into and bringing their children in from outside of the immediate area, but that doesn't stop you having customers who are representative of that area, and you providing something that that allows them to use your facility. And then of course sustainability, the finances are absolutely crucial on this, aren't they, with what we're facing going forward. John, have you got any closing remarks?
No, I mean, I think that's a really good summary. I mean, I think Rob made the point about this continuum around, you know, we often know the price of leisure, but do we know the value? And that's an area that I think is really needs to come out of those sort of strategic discussions and establishing, you know, what the purpose is. And I think going back to this, you know, the point around that circumstances change. We know that the landscape does change over time. We know that the health landscape is going to change in the future. Creation of ICSs, re-establishment of PCNs and all of those sorts of things. And I think somebody used the phrase, you know, it's a different language in some of those other arenas. But I think in leisure, it's really important that we put ourselves in that uncomfortable place and be prepared to learn a different language and engage with different people, because I think that's one of the avenues that we should be pursuing in order that we do sort of broaden appeal and encourage a greater proportion of the population to be physically active. So I think there's lots of new opportunities out there to be innovative and to change, and it'll be uncomfortable for a bit, but I think it'll be well worth it if we pursue it.
Right, brilliant. Thank you very much, John. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Becoming a regular thing. That's good. Please put in the chat any observations, reflections on today's session. If you put in whether you'd be interested in having this network repeated, maybe in a couple of months, then please add that. If you think the recording will be of value to colleagues in other authorities or within your own authority, then again, please pass that on. I think this is very much kind of your space to develop and to take forward. It's something that we talk about internally about how we support the sector, but really we should be going on the basis of insight and understanding you guys. So please feed that back in. Jay did put in the chat the links for the insight sessions that are happening for the next 3 weeks. In terms of the next talking space, that's at the end of May on the Tuesday. I think it's the 24th. It's on Green Social 22nd. Is that right, Jay? 22nd? 25th? She's putting fingers up on the screen for me.
25th. I'll try and find you the link.
So that's Green Social Prescribing. So we've got Dr. Miles Richardson, Professor Miles Richardson from University of Derby, talking about the importance of connecting with nature. But there will also be introductions into the Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire Green Social Prescribing pilots, which I'm sure there will be a lot of people signing up for that one. So it'll be very interesting, and seeing how we can get the traditional sport and leisure sector involved in that agenda will be interesting. And then in June and July, we will have talking spaces that focus on the strategy engagement going forward. So I think there will be 3 of those over a 6-week period, but you'll get that information through to you. So thank you very much to everyone. Have a great day, and thanks for your contributions and your time. Okay, bye everyone.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks everyone.